Okay, folks, we're going to stay focused on elections this morning, and we're going to go into state elections. Joining me now, Democrat candidate for the State House District 11, Lee Shiver.
Good
How are
morning.
you, Mr. Shiver?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with the usual stuff. The why are you running? Because what I was reading on your blog, and so have you run for office before?
No, sir, not. The last time was a high school student council president in 1972.
Things have changed.
Quite a bit.
I didn't want to be the one to break it to you, but since then things have changed in politics dramatically.
Quite a bit.
So what led you? Sometimes when I talk to a lot of candidates, I know somebody might think the word fortunate is not what you put in place here, but I'm fortunate to get an opportunity to talk to a lot of candidates, see what direction they want to go, because our goal here is just to bring information to voters. So when I talk to candidates that have never run for any office before, there's something that just gave them that spark that said, I've got to go do this. What was that for you, and why are you doing it?
You were right again. I was happily retired, 37 years educator, 4 years teaching. The rest of it was in school leadership positions at the school level, the district level, state level. Enjoyed my career and was retired for 2 years. When the Parkland shooting happened on Valentine's Day, I was online looking at a post from a friend of mine who was on Facebook. Now, I hadn't seen Mark in almost 30 years. He was a former fraternity brother of mine at the university, and turns out he's an Episcopal priest in Coral Springs, Florida. And he had posted on his website the fact that he had had to conduct the funeral of one of these students who was killed in that shooting. He said it was the hardest thing he had ever done. So I sent back trying to do some sort of sympathetic message of support and comfort. And he sent me back a private message, though, that really bothered me. And basically it was about his trip to the morgue.
I read that in your blog.
To perform a religious sacrament over this dead girl's body.
At first you didn't think it could be
right.
as dramatic or graphic as he described.
I thought...
I didn't mean to interrupt, but I did read that
that's
in
right.
your blog.
And I thought, as a lot of people do these days, people tend to exaggerate and embellish things. But he described this girl's wounds. He said that she had a hole in the side of her head the size of a baseball, and her skull was peeled back, and he couldn't let her parents see it. And he was just going through all this stuff. So that upset me. When you're at the house in the morning and you're drinking your coffee and you're feeding the birds and you're just not thinking about such things, I started thinking again about the fact that I was the principal at Tift County High School in Tifton when Columbine happened in 1999. A few months later, I came to Jasper as the superintendent of schools there in Pickens for 6 years. I thought about the day after Columbine, and it was difficult. I was the director of the Georgia School for the Deaf when the Virginia Tech massacre happened. Those kids were scared to death, even though this happened hundreds of miles away. Most of the staff and faculty at the Georgia School for the Deaf are deaf or hard of hearing, and it was a huge campus, and they were worried and scared and unnerved. And at the end of my career, I was an elementary principal in Albany when the Sandy Hook massacre happened. And I kept thinking about the kids. I kept thinking about the fear. I kept thinking about the anxiety. The day after Columbine at Tift County High School, 20% of our students were absent the next day. And I had a couple of jokers come to school the next day in trench coats. One of my assistant principals brought them in. And I said, what? And they said, hey, we're not in violation of any dress code here. And I said, but you're scaring people, and I'm responsible for the school climate, so you've got a choice here. Take off your trench coats, leave them in my office, and go to class, which is what I want you to do. Or if you have to have these on, you can go home, but you're not going to disrupt the climate of the school. Back then, you may remember, we had online community bulletin boards, and they had posted some sympathetic comments regarding the Columbine shooter. So I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I went down to see Rick, the incumbent, Rick Jaspers. He's my representative. I've known Rick since '99. He was the ag agent in Jasper in Pickens County when I was the superintendent of schools there, and I considered him to be a friend. And I visited him in his office in the Capitol. And
So this was after the Parkland shooting.
the week after, I believe.
You went down. You went down to the Capitol to visit your representative, which is now your opponent.
I had an appointment.
Right.
And so when I went down to see him, I just said, "What? I'm a constituent. I can't stop thinking about this. I'm worried about this. What can we do?" And Rick wanted to talk to me about mental health and his research with mental health and mental illness. And I said, "Okay, I'm with you, but being angry and hateful isn't mental illness." And so then he wanted to talk about these terrorist attacks that happened in China, and I knew that a group of terrorists with knives had done attacks. I knew that, and I said, "But what about these guns that these school and mass shooters are using? What about this stuff?" And his response to me was, "There's nothing practical to be done about the guns." And I just thought, well, I don't understand that. So then I asked him, if this had happened at Pickens High School instead of Parkland, what would you be doing differently? And what Rick said was he wouldn't be doing anything differently. So I didn't understand that either. He asked me, "What are some of your ideas? What do you think we ought to do?" And I said, "I don't know. I haven't thought about this. This has only come on my heart and my mind recently. I don't know what I ought to do." And so it was a cordial meeting. We shook hands. I left. Couldn't stop thinking about it. So when I got home, I started making a few phone calls, seeing if there's anybody. Was there any opposition? Was anybody running against Rick? Did anybody feel differently than he did about the guns? And there wasn't anyone. I went to my first political party meeting in my life ever, because as a school man and school person appointed by school boards, try to stay neutral. Very much so. And there wasn't anybody. I told my story. I was so upset and still anxious about it, still thinking about it. And the second time I went to a meeting, they said, "We have someone. We found someone." And I said, "Great. Who is it?" And they started applauding and pointing at me. And my wife was there just holding her head in her hands, going, "Oh, wow." So that's why I'm doing it.
Okay. Let me.
I thought,
all right. Let me.
I've learned a lot.
Let me say this. Okay. So I did read. I read your resume. I read your resume, and I read the several of the blog posts.
Thanks.
Okay, so we're up to here, and you met with your opponent, which is your constituent, and you met in the office. But at that time you left, you said you didn't know what exactly to do. What are you telling voters you would do if you are the representative of the 11th district in Georgia? Now, what is that answer?
I've done a lot of research,
Okay.
and I will tell you this.
But what is your answer? I'm going to say that, not the answer. What is your answer?
Thank you. Because there is no the answer.
Right.
I've learned that too. I was really surprised that gun laws in Georgia are as lax as they are. I believe there are a lot of things other states have already done that we can do here as well. For example, in Georgia, there is no required waiting or cooling off period for someone who purchases a gun. A hothead can go in, purchase a gun, go do what they need to do. Most other states have a waiting or cooling off period. We also don't have universal background checks in Georgia. Some of the misnomer of that's in the literature is a lot of people refer to that as the gun show loophole because it's a private sale. But basically what it means, in a private sale, there's no background check that's required. Other states have said any kind of a gun sale has to go through a background check. And so usually in those places they take it to a licensed gun dealer and then they run the background check for a private sale. We have Florida raised their minimum age from 18 to 21 for purchasing a semi-automatic rifle, semi-automatic shotgun. It was 18 at the time of the Parkland shooting. Georgia's minimum is 18, although 21 for a handgun. Georgia does not restrict magazine capacities, although for a rifle, a semi-automatic rifle, although there is a law in the hunting laws that restrict the number of shells you can have of a shotgun for shooting game other than deer or bear. I'm not sure of the specifics of that, but there's some differences there. restricting gun magazine capacities to no more than 10 rounds would seem to me to be a common sense form of gun legislation. One of the things that has been put in place in other states that makes a lot of sense to me, especially with some new data that came out in these school safety study committees. There's both the Senate and the House. Rick's House committees had meetings around the state that came out was the existence of something called extreme risk protection orders. They're also known as red flag laws. And basically, the way they work is that if a family member, significant other, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, somebody close to someone knows that they are threatening to kill themselves or other people, and they are talking about using their guns to do it, that person can make a report to local law enforcement or local court. And in states that have these, the judge can issue an extreme risk protection order, which would provide for law enforcement to separate that person from their guns temporarily. One of the most recent states to do this, I think, was Massachusetts, and they require a hearing to have to be conducted within 10 days so that the person that's being worried, whoever we're worried about here, that person can have an opportunity to explain themselves. So the laws differ from state to state, but to me, the bigger part of this is, and I sat in one of these, I've been to several of these school safety study committee meetings. One presentation in Atlanta recently, they talked about the escalating rate of child and teen suicides in Georgia. And Rick expressed alarm, and I was alarmed too. I'm sitting out there in the audience going, can this data be right? What they didn't say, though, was how these kids were killing themselves. So I looked that up as well. There's a unit with the GBI called the Child Fatality Review Unit, and the most common method is hanging, self-hanging. The second one is firearms. In states that have extreme risk protection orders, you could intervene in a situation like that and possibly thwart a suicide by a child or a teen. That also applies to an even bigger number, which is the number of veteran suicides in Georgia, and that's disturbing as well. The other part about this is I've had lots of discussions with people who don't agree with me.
All right, well,
but one of the things we talked about is safe storage of guns, requiring people that have guns, if they're unattended, to keep them locked up or so that a child can't access them.
All right, you've used a couple words that are keywords that maybe some people will listen for: intervene, okay, require. For what some of the things you've just said, someone on the other side of your positions feel that maybe you just crossed over a lot of our rights, and that being said, how would you institute many of the things you said, or say when we say common sense gun legislation, and protect the Second Amendment in this country? Because a lot of things that some people see happening or somebody wants to happen, they look like steps towards the ultimate goal for some.
I've heard that.
Now, some have the ultimate goal, whether you want to argue or not, and I don't. Some do have the ultimate goal.
I've heard that. What I neglected to say a while ago when I went to see Rick was I reminded him I'm a gun owner, and I have guns, and I'm keeping them.
Wait a minute. I want to say something there. I haven't interrupted you. I won't. I'll let you go, but I want to say something there. You're running as a Democrat, and I haven't gotten into that.
I'm running as a Republican.
Huh?
I'm the Democrat.
Yeah, you're running as.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Running as a Democrat, yes. Right. You're running as a Democrat. I will say this. This is my comment. Democrats always say, but I have a gun. Okay, and that is like, the Second Amendment, the NRA or members or Second Amendment or the right says, yeah, but that's what Democrats always say, but I have a gun too, and I don't want them to take my gun. I don't know. What if I'm not buying that?
Well, you won't believe me.
Well, the Second Amendment. I keep wondering how you're not edging towards, and there are some out there with the ultimate goal. Now that's up to you to decide whether you want to say that or not. There are some there's some out there that use the same. You've done your research.
Yes, sir.
And you've studied. Okay. And you're passionate about this. And I will not, absolutely today, will not say anything that implies that, hey, your passion is your passion and your belief is your belief, and I got respect for that. Whether I agree with it or not, at the end of the day, same with me, with you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay?
That's right.
All right? But, hey, this is your passion, and you're a candidate wanting somebody to vote based on this, many other things, but I want to stay focused on this for a minute. What about, how do you safeguard the Second Amendment with some of these things that you're saying you would want to do?
That is a great question, and I have had that discussion many times on the campaign trail. During the research, I came across a Supreme Court decision in 2008, D.C. versus Heller. It's the law of the land now, and that majority opinion was written by Justice Anton Scalia, the late Justice Anton Scalia. And in that decision, which interestingly enough, the NRA fought tooth and nail not to have that case go to the Supreme Court because they were afraid that the Supreme Court might not align themselves with what our founders and our original founders and the framers of the Constitution intended. There was really a fear that the Supreme Court might say something differently than what the Second Amendment provides for. The Supreme Court in D.C. versus Heller upheld our individual rights to bear arms. For the first time in the history of the United States, the Supreme Court decision was made, a point of great celebration. But in that same decision, Justice Scalia wrote, however, it does not mean that a person can have any kind of weapon whatsoever for any intention whatsoever and carry that weapon for whatever purpose to whatever end. That was part of the same decision. So in other states where some of these things that I'm proposing have been enacted and put into law, the states have been sued and the courts have upheld this in the interest of public safety. And obviously these things do not require, if you're requiring something like safe storage of firearms, that doesn't mean anybody's giving up their guns, and it doesn't mean you can't have 24 rifles. Keep them safely stored. If you need one by your bed or under your pillow at night, yes. But when there are children around or when thieves break in, we should have guns, and I have a locked gun safe.
When you brought up Scalia, you ventured into the right to bear arms, right? And
that's the Second Amendment,
right? But in reading the right to bear arms, wasn't part of Scalia's statement there is our right to bear arms, and I don't like to mess it up because of Antonin Scalia. I've read this, but was he saying like, okay, but I don't want to use the word limited, but you can't drive a tank downtown to the local place and say, well, I have a right to bring my tank here to eat lunch, and isn't that some of the weapons that he was talking about, like, you know, in that response, not just the right to bear arms or right to bear arms?
Well, I don't know. But I think a lot of this has to do with trying to move as much responsibility as possible back to the state level by that wording of that decision. And the example is in Georgia's Constitution, which basically says the same thing, but then says there's a comma, or it says either but or however. The Georgia legislature may have regulations or rules regarding how we bear our arms.
Right, let me ask you this. Some of the things, in the effort of interest of time here, some of the things that we've discussed, tell me what, as a representative, you think what legislation could be put into place. And your passion is school safety. Would I be wrong? School safety of the children, yes. Okay? Reading through everything, and you discussed where you have been in your career at every point. Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland, the list goes on, where you have been, Virginia Tech, where you have been in your career when these took place and how they've affected you emotionally. I'm gonna say emotionally because because that if I was in the education, if I was an educator and I'd spent my whole life, every time that happened, it would have an effect on me in a different way. That being said, what can you implement that you feel the kids would be safer, our children would be safer? What do you think we need to do? Get specific on a representative. Lee Shiver goes to the Gold Dome. This is what I want to put in place. This is the legislation I'd like to offer, and this is what I think will make our children safer. What is that for you?
Well, in addition to what I've already mentioned, those laws, I think there are others as well. I've got a list of 39 things on my website. Now, some of them obviously are more feasible than others, but they come from different ideas that different people have had. For example, one is I discovered in my research that teachers and school personnel are, by Georgia law, immune from liability for providing information to law enforcement about student access to drugs, drug use, meth labs, and that kind of stuff. We could have the same kind of law that would provide immunity from liability for teachers, school personnel, who would let law enforcement know that there are students who have children that have access to firearms. As an example, I certainly think requiring us to lock up our guns when they're unattended or they're not in use is a way to protect students. I will say this too, as disappointed as I've been in these school safety meetings, and I think your listeners and viewers will appreciate this, there have been some ideas that have come out, and I'm not going to brag about me getting in trouble years ago for raising the same issues, but one of them, for example, recently was how fire alarms have been weaponized. And this fellow from in schools, this fellow from Alpharetta, who was the director of public safety, got up and made a presentation to the safety committee, and he explained, he showed a big picture of Alpharetta High School, and he explained how in a fire alarm, all of the students had to evacuate the school and go to the football stadium. Now, fire alarms by Georgia law, fire drills have to be conducted once a month in a school. And he went on to say, it's been over almost 40 years since a child in the United States perished in a school fire. And he explained about the fact that schools are no longer constructed with these kind of combustible materials. And he talked about how sophisticated the technologies were and this, that, and the other, and that school fires are not the threat that they used to be. But he went on to say, in today's world, he said, why should we tell students when an alarm goes off that they're to go out of the school building and go to a football stadium? And he advocated for, let's change that monthly fire drill from a fire drill to a safety drill and do a lockdown in which all doors are secured, blinds are closed, everyone gets quiet, and the internal communication system of the school gets in place to determine what is going on. Is it a fire? Is it a threat? Is there an active shooter? Is there some other emergency? Do we have an intruder on campus? It could be any number of things. But instead of just sending people out, let's do that. And then we've got several things in place that are protecting student safety. So, and I thought, good luck with that one, because years ago when I was complaining bitterly about getting a phone call, said you didn't conduct a fire drill last week, and it was the last week of school before the Christmas break or something, and I thought we had a month. I thought, well, here we go again, disrupting class time, moving students out and bringing them back. And I won't tell you I had the discussion with, let's just say he was a high-level state official who wound up calling me. After this meeting, this committee meeting, I went up to this fellow and I said, I have a question for you. I said, why didn't you say to the committee why you think this is a good idea? And he said, I just didn't do that. And I said, well, and I introduced myself and I asked him, I said, why do you think that what you just said is a good idea? I said, by the way, I agree with you. I think that's a really good idea. We need to get to that. And he looked at me and he said, sitting ducks. I said, yes, sir, you're right. I said, I would like for you very much for your next presentation to be to the State Board of Education, because this is something, as an example of what you asked me, would be a change in the law that I think would be both preventative and provide for additional safety in schoolhouses across the state, and it doesn't cost anything.
We got to get to a couple more subjects before we run out of time.
Okay.
What about? But let me ask you this, and try to let's try to get a couple more questions in here. So you're opposed to administration having access to a gun in a school? You want no weapons in the school?
Oh no, I didn't say that.
I know you didn't. I just want to know.
No, sir. At Tift County High School in 1999, we had an office, a school security office, and inside the school were members of the Tifton Police Department. There were 2 members on our campus, and they were armed.
No.
That was before Columbine.
All right, so, we have school safety officers there, SRR resource officers there now on campuses. But I'm talking about actual administration. You're opposed to anybody in the administration, not a school resource officer? Would you be opposed to anybody in the administration having a firearm?
No.
Okay.
But I am opposed to arming teachers.
Why?
Because 2 main reasons. The biggest one is when law enforcement responds to a threat, a mass shooter. And we have different scenarios that have played out all over the country with various degrees of success. A lot of times they're coming after the damage has been done. Trying to determine who is the person that's the shooter and who is the person with the gun that's the teacher can be extremely difficult in a very volatile, highly emotional situation.
We hope it's an unusual situation, not to interrupt, sir, but we hope it's an unusual situation. It never happens again.
Right.
And is the county, Parkland, is that Broward County? Is that the name of it? I forget what the name of it is. But what about the sheriff and the SRO that did not go in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So I understand what you're saying. You're saying when they do go in, identifying the shooter versus the person that the teacher could be, a tragedy in the making. But
I'll tell you this: if this had been part of when I was being a principal or superintendent, there were people on my staff who were not teachers, who were parapros. I can even remember a couple of custodians that I would have rather had access to a firearm than teachers. Our teachers have enough on them as it is. Our instructional programs need their devotion, their commitment to their time, all of their energy, mental energy, emotional energy needs to be on teaching kids and not thinking about and worrying about getting to their gun and confronting someone. Because what kids do, and they'll do this, is they will say, so-and-so, such and such, I heard such and such and so-and-so. And all of a sudden you've got a teacher, instead of talking about the causes of World War I and what happened with that, now they're thinking in the back of their mind, oh, I've got to be ready to go here because this could be going on, this could be going on, this might happen. And we don't need that in our schools. We really don't. I wanted to tell you the second reason, though. In my last gig at this elementary school in Albany, I had a kindergarten teacher down there who punched one of her students in the face with her fist. And I thought the teacher not only should have been fired, but they should have had their license taken away. But she was only suspended. And I got to thinking about when the 2 counties in Georgia, the school boards voted to allow certain teachers to be armed, what it would be like for a teacher like that to have a firearm on campus. I don't think it's a good idea, but I am not opposed to administration having that.
All right. So, what about? And while we're having the discussion, which I enjoy, what about the cultural shift in this country to where the argument could be that no matter what you do, no matter what laws you pass, and I don't want to take us from nice rural North Georgia all the way to Chicago, but what if it's all the laws you pass do not stop people from getting a gun if they want to, and you may be talking about things that you feel would deter.
Correct.
Okay. But there's no real proof that those things that you're talking about would stop what we're talking about, there's no real actual proof on that. So what say you on the cultural issue in this country that we have in the schools, or what's going on, and the mental health?
Well, as I said earlier,
because I'm gonna tell you something. Don't take us wrong, but I know we're talking politics and election, but I actually watch people, and I know graphics today, and I know how real graphics are, and we desensitized our children to a point that they shoot people on that screen, and when they get done, there's things that are happening that shooting in desensitizing our children to danger or tragedy. I think we got some serious problems.
Well,
and it's not gun safety, to me personally, that addresses that.
Well, see, and I want to speak to that, but the thing about what you're asking me is, I just think that gun safety needs to be included. And what's happening here is we're getting this, everybody wants to talk about everything else except some regulations or laws that might impact gun safety and gun control. And for me, it is, why can't we include that? Because other states have already done it, and it's common sense legislation. Now, to your point about video games, I'm assuming, I grew up in the 50s and 60s, and I sat in front of the TV, and I watched Roy and Dale, and I watched Bonanza and Steve McQueen and Wanted Dead or Alive, and I watched Paladin, and I watched all of that stuff. I mean, I had my toy guns and shoot them up and all this kind of stuff. We played cops and robbers and cowboys and Indians. We did all that. So I, too, used to think after Space Invaders and Tetris and all that stuff ran their gamut, and we got into the not active shooter, but the first-person shooter video games, which I never played, got to be something there. Last year, or this year, doing my research, I came across this book that came out last year called Moral Combat. Moral Combat. The authors are professors at two different universities, Markey and Ferguson, I believe. And they show with data and research that there is no connection between the violence that that people are experiencing playing these video games and the mass shooters. And they go on to give specific examples. But the biggest one is there are millions of people around the world, including the United States, playing these games. And if these games were motivating these students to do this, we would have a heck of a lot more shootings and killings than we do. In fact, you may not. I highly recommend the book to you because it was hard for me to even believe I had to read this chapter twice. It has had the opposite effect, in that the authors say, instead of these students being bored or going out and riding around and doing all these kinds of things, they get together, they play these games, and there's a cathartic effect in it. And they go ahead and talk about how in their interviews and some of their surveys, students have actually admitted that releases aggression that's pent up in them that they wouldn't have otherwise a release way. So while I'm thinking about the movies I went to see when I was in the 60s, and there were some Taxi Driver, Psycho, Straight Jacket, I mean, there were some difficult movies in addition to the monster movies I enjoyed, and all the shoot 'em ups on TV. When you talk about that cultural thing, it resonates with me, because in part of studying this stuff, I found out that the rate of gun homicides in America is declining, and has been on a decline for years. And I thought, that's really interesting, and so is the rate of gun ownership, although more guns are out there, which basically means there are fewer and fewer people gathering and keeping more guns. So it seems to me that if we could figure out a way to do what the safety study committees and other people are advocating, and include doing something about these guns in those conversations and in the laws that we want to pass to make our schools safer and make public safety better, we will be a lot further down the road. And quite frankly, I just think there's a really big middle ground there.
The only thing I want to say to close that is Parkland was a complete failure within the system. When you go through the system, because you've named a lot of checks, common sense legislation, Parkland was a complete failure through the system, all the way through the system, the educational system, the law enforcement, service, social services, complete failure in the system. If you go into that, we have to move to some other things. If you'd like to tell people how you stand on education, taxes, or anything else, but you can say so. But Parkland, no matter what you're telling me now, was a total failure in the system.
But in
and all the legislation that you named, I don't feel would have changed Parkland. And I think the system was broken.
An extreme risk protection order would have caught that guy. An extreme risk protection order. Florida passed that law 3 weeks to the day after the shooting. Second thing here, that kid was 19 years old. He bought that semi-automatic rifle locally. If the law had been 21, we don't know. I want to go back to a point, though, you said that I think is a very good one. And I appreciate you saying this. I really do. And you said it well. It is not, any of these things will absolutely guarantee the end of it all. That's true. All I'm looking for is to reduce the threat, to significantly reduce the threat, to make us all safer, to do something that makes us less likely to be the victims of a mass public shooting.
Well, I will say this. I'll say by association, okay, and you haven't said this yourself, but by association, where you say, you're with the Democrat Party, and by the Democrat Party having an association with people like Michael Bloomberg, it makes it hard, it makes it very difficult to have a conversation that doesn't lead people to feel that the ultimate goal is to take the gun. That's where, so I don't think, I don't, obviously there's things I disagree with you on, maybe there's things I agree with you on, but the conversation gets kindly ended when people like Michael Bloomberg get in the game and they start funding with their billions of dollars some organizations that the end all would be to take the gun.
I know,
and that's what's difficult. And you,
I understand it, and I've heard that, and I've had some exchanges online with complete strangers on Facebook. To that point, I don't have any of Michael Bloomberg's money. Heck, I don't even have any money from the Democratic Party.
No, but
Georgia,
don't take
because
no, but you don't have it. I sit here. No, I know Michael Bloomberg didn't send you any money. I didn't have to look, but an association that you have on your website, what is it? Mothers
Demand Action.
Yeah, Mothers Demand Action. Michael Bloomberg has
Moms Demand Action.
Moms Demand Action. Michael Bloomberg supports and has put money into.
Well, I understand
that,
how much
but that's what I'm saying.
But I would say to you that when I think of Moms Demand
Action, I'm not against Moms Demanding Action, and that sounds like, see, that's the thing that I guess, I won't say nervous, but I guess that's the thing that kindly ends the conversation for some people, is because when you see Moms Demand Action, well, who's going to be against a mom? And who's going to be against a mom demanding action, right? Nobody. Who in their right mind wants to be against mom, first of all? You know better than that, demanding action. But then when you dig a little deeper, this is a group that Michael Bloomberg supports and has financially put a little in or something, and you start looking into these things and you say, wait a minute, that's where the discussion ends for some people, is all I'm saying.
Well, and I understand that, but the Moms Demand Action members I have spoken with at these committee meetings and that I have met who've had their red shirts on, almost every single one of them are gun owners.
I don't doubt that.
And they're telling me, and I'm understanding this, and I appreciate you saying what you said, but they are like the Mothers Against Driving Drunk.
I'm not going to be against the
Back in the day, there were tens of thousands of people being killed on our highways. Here comes Moms Against Drunk Driving. Laws changed. Do we still have people getting behind the wheel under the influence? Yes, but nowhere near what it used to be, simply because moms got out and they became activists, and they said, we need to change our laws, and I think they're trying to do the same thing for gun safety.
All right, my fault. I'll take the responsibility. This has gone too far, too long, but it's been a good discussion, and I've enjoyed it.
And I appreciate the invitation.
Let's move it to this. What kind of Democrat are you? No, I mean, are you?
I'll tell you.
Because right now, Eric Holder said last week, the new Democrat Party, and we have a lot of national Democrats that are right now is taking the lead as socialist Democrats, and so every time I meet somebody that's running on the Democrat, I say, what kind of Democrat are you?
I don't know. I'm not very good with the label bit. And it probably goes back when I was an adolescent, and I was a big Richard Nixon man when I was in high school. And so when it's time to register to vote, I went down to register, And I registered as a Republican. And of course, I grew up in a small North Florida town, Perry, Florida, a rural paper mill town. My mother was a school teacher. My daddy worked at the mill. And so they just looked at me, and I came back to the house, and Mom said, did you register? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, you registered as a Democrat? I said, no, ma'am. I said, I'm an independent-minded person. I believe in our president. And she said, get your butt back down to there and change your registration. I said, why should I do that? She said, because, son, you can still vote for Nixon as president, but you can't vote for the city council, you can't vote for county commissioner, you can't vote for mayor, and you can't vote for school superintendent here. I said, why not? She said, because it's all Democrats in the primary here, and all the elections are decided in the Democratic primary. Well, that's how ignorant I was. So over the years, I've tried to figure out, okay, listen to candidates, listen to them, hear what they have to say, try to focus on their presentations and not what the media presents. Listen to the candidate, and then try to make a decision when it's time to go vote. So when you say, what kind of Democrat am I guess I'm moderate. I don't know. I'm not that good with labels. I really am not.
So you're running in a district. You got part of Gordon County, part of Murray County, and all of Pickens County. So you're running in a district, and I'm just throwing it out here. Not exact numbers, I'm not for sure, but you're running in a district that's probably votes 75%, 80%. Yes, well, sir. With Trump, it was 80%, yes, right? Sir. So the last election, 80% Republican.
Right.
And you're running as a Democrat against an incumbent that has the money to run.
It sure does.
So why jump on that? You're in a district that's probably going to vote for Brian Kemp, okay? Brian Kemp will probably win your district as governor. He'll probably get the majority of the vote in that area.
I would be surprised if he did not.
Right. So how do you break that? Are you running as your own man in that district, or how do you answer questions when people say, well, are you supporting Stacey Abrams? Are you supporting Brian Kemp? How are you running in the district in a strong Republican district?
I am my own man. And here's what I'm finding out. And it's been pleasant. I have to tell you, I have not had but one hostile exchange on the campaign trail. One. So I felt...
I'm sorry. It's my joke of the day.
Not you.
I didn't know. All right.
Not you. This happened at the Barbecue, Boogie, and Blues Festival. Not Booze Festival, Blues Festival in Calhoun. And I just walked away because I thought, this isn't worth it. But anyhow, here's what's happening. Now, remember, I was superintendent of Pickens for 6 years when we moved up. And so, my school board, everyone, Republicans, and, I was not politically affiliated or aligned with anybody. I was just doing my job as a paid employee and a public servant. So I'm going around talking to everybody, former friends, people that I know that live in these communities. We go to festivals and events and what have you. And I know what you just said about 80% Republicans. I understand that. But I asked them my question, and I say, I am a gun owner. I am keeping my guns, but I am concerned about the guns these school and mass shooters use, and I think we need to do something about it. Well, the ones that want to jump over here to, you're going down the road to confiscation, I listen, and then I bring it back to, were you aware? And then I start saying things like about the cooling off or waiting period, about restricting gun magazines, about universal background checks, about requiring parents to have locked storage. They don't know it. They do not know this. And I cannot fault them, Mr. Pritchard, because I did not know it either. I did not know all this stuff. So I talked to them for a few minutes, and they go, I agree with that. I agree with that. I've been to 26 different churches in the last 27 Sundays in Pickens, Murray, and Gordon counties. And I wait till after the service and wait till there's no one around, and I go up to the pastor and I ask them their opinion. I don't tell them I'm a candidate. I don't tell them I'm running for office, and I sure as heck don't use their name or their church in any of my blog posts. I don't do any of that. But I asked them my question. And of those 26 faith leaders I have spoken with and talked to them a little bit about this, 6 have disagreed with me. The rest of them said, most of them are very candid and being very honest. Well, I haven't thought a lot about this, but yeah, we need to do something else. So I feel that sentiment is out there, but there are a lot of people who aren't sure what to do, how to do it, and I'm wanting, and I one of the things I want to thank you for, and getting the chance, this is the best opportunity to do it, is calling and saying, we like to look at a different viewpoint here. I think voters need to hear a different viewpoint. I think they need to hear somebody's other view of the way things are going. And that is what we're supposed to be doing, I think, when it comes to elections and when it comes to having candidates that we can listen to and think about what they have to say. So that means a lot to me. So I don't know what's going to happen on November the 6th, but I know on November the 7th, no matter the outcome of the election, I will be a very, very happy man. And I want to tell you this. No matter what happens with the election with me, I know this issue is not going away. It's not. We're going to have to move toward, other states have done it, the courts have upheld it, and we can do it, and it does not lead to the confiscation of guns. Even our founders had laws about registering guns and keeping gunpowder separate from the muskets. That was back in the day. And so we've always found a way to balance our Second Amendment rights with public safety. And I think most Americans, most Georgians, and most people who are in District 11 believe that. Now, whether that translates to a vote for me when they go inside, that's to be determined.
District 11, what other issues pertain to District 11 that you feel is important to the voters there, the people there in Atlanta, outside of gun issues?
Well, I think obviously the biggest one, and I may be biased, but it's always been this way for me, is public education, the quality of our schools. And that's really important. We've lost, I think one of the things that bothered me about now that the state's coffers have gotten flush with money.
I read your blog on the 2 teachers that you met that gave you a donation. I just want you to know I always do my reading.
Thank you. I'm glad you did. And I don't know if I've conveyed my personality to you in this conversation, but that was, I mean, I was just overjoyed with that. I mean, I kept thinking about them the whole time. But the whole idea that now we're putting money back into education where we need to be, where it needs to be, says to me, why wasn't this the priority all along? It would seem to me that the quality of our schools, our public schools especially, should be one of the legislative priorities every year, and that we should start with after law enforcement. After law enforcement, we should start with our schools.
What are they telling us that's not correct when they say that the last budget fully funded QBE?
When they say it's not correct?
Yeah, what is not correct about that? Because they say, what is not correct? Well, I mean, they tell us the last budget fully funded QBE, quality-based education, right?
Right, it's the
QBE,
formula.
All right. What are they telling us that's wrong if they say it's fully funded? What say you to that? I mean, when you say funding education and why it's not a priority and things like that. I mean, tell me where our state legislators have it wrong, what they've been doing thus far.
Oh, because they haven't fully funded it every year.
Okay.
That's the problem. That's the issue. The austerity cuts started in, let's see.
Right around 210, 209?
No, sir. 2001, because when I got to Pickens,
well, I mean, the really big hits seem to be around that area.
Well, they kept increasing. I remember, I think it was 2000 or 2001, the first ones came. I went to see our finance director. I said, what in the Sam Hill is this? What is this? And explained it to me, and just quickly, it was extremely confusing at first, because basically the bottom line was we were out this amount of money, and it was a hit. So we were like, okay, how are we going to adjust our budget to take this? So the next year, we're told there will not be another austerity cut. Great. But the money wasn't restored. What they meant was, you won't be cut anymore. You're still cut this amount as a percentage, and that percentage went up. I think in Pickens County it was millions of dollars over the time that they restored this. And this was all over the state of Georgia. So what was happening, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is a lot of school systems were, the biggest thing was personnel. That's the biggest cost in the school system. So they were cutting back on their personnel, which consequently meant larger class sizes. And those were the 2 main areas that school systems had to cut back on. And then other schools had the nerve to raise local property taxes to make up the difference. It was very controversial, highly politicized. It caused a lot of sleepless nights for school board members and superintendents. I was an outsider, so I had no problem recommending to the board what to do, because you can always tell the outsider to hit the road. So my big deal with that was that should have been a priority for Georgia all along. We're not where we need to be in this state in terms of our student outcomes, our SAT averages, our ACT average. We are not, and I am really concerned about the fact that all over the state of Georgia, we've been touting these high graduation rates. I know up here in Fannin County and in Pickens and Murray and Gordon, there are these headlines. The AJC had them. Graduation rates like hit highest in decades. This was all over the state. We did away with the high school graduation test. The high school graduation test was put in place back in the 70s, early 80s, so we would stop graduating functionally illiterate students. That's why it was there. We've taken it away now. And I'm very concerned that we're going to go back to having to listen to chambers of commerce, Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, different groups say, what, this guy I got from your high school, he can't do this, she can't do this, she's not able to do this, that, and the other, because we have lowered that standard for graduation. And I'm very concerned about that. So to me, that would have been part of the funding. The current testing situation we have is far, far too expensive. We spend way too much money on this stuff. And the waste is why we keep changing it. Every few years they change this state assessment system. When I was a principal, when I was a superintendent, I'd go, why do they keep changing it? Well, if you keep changing it, you cannot do trend analysis of school successes. You cannot track student achievement over time, because you'll hear a superintendent you say, well, the test changed. And so it's just this evolving, and I used to complain bitterly about this when, you'll appreciate this, Kathy Cox was my boss, Republican state school superintendent, when I was the director of the Georgia School for the Deaf. And she and I would have wonderful conversations about this, because she was extremely concerned about the impact the budget, the school system, state school, public school budget was having on classrooms, because she was a former classroom teacher. And so she and I got along great. I mean, and she did a lot of things that really helped not only the Georgia School for the Deaf, but the Georgia Academy for the Blind in Macon and the Atlanta Area School for the Deaf. She was a tremendous advocate for these children, and I will always respect her. I consider her a friend now. I just wish that when she had left for that Washington think tank, I'd seen the writing on the wall and I had left.
Well, I'll just have to say I will not be received very well on my comment here, will not be received very well. I think that kids should not be allowed to graduate unless they could change oil and change a tire. So outside of that, Siri, send somebody to change my tire. We're going to be in a mess one day.
I'm with you.
So I've often said I'd just like to add drive a nail, recognize the tool, the 5 major tools in the world. Just take a test and recognize them. That is a saw. Okay, that is a hammer. That is a nail.
I think I could stand with you beside that and say, yes, I agree with that. And can we include personal finance?
Yeah,
a checkbook, a credit card, an interest rate. I mean, just those 3 things.
I mean, and I love our kids, but exactly, I like to just have one section that calls dealing with just the simple things.
I'm with you.
That's it.
I'm with you.
I thank you very much, Mr. Shiver.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
I've enjoyed the conversation. Lee Shiver, Democrat candidate for Georgia State House District 11. And he is on the ballot. Early voting has started in Pickens County, so you guys can go vote. And so thank you very much. Appreciate it. We're going to be back after these messages to wrap the show up. We've got a couple more things we're going to talk about on state elections when we return.